everyone, Autism Fitness founder Eric Chessen, leading the movement for movement and bringing you another edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training, where I take a concept or a strategy, something that we use to great success with our autism and neurodivergent life skill athletes, so that you can think about it, work it into your programs, and make much more meaningful and effective fitness, particularly strength training, decisions for your life skill athletes as well. Before I get started, please definitely subscribe, and share these videos with someone for whom it might make a difference in enhancing the quality of their fitness or adapted physical education programs for those in their community. So today I am going to be talking about when to modify and when to progress a particular exercise. So before getting into that, we need to talk about things from a general perspective. Effective strength training means that we are using the practice of progressive overload, which means that an exercise needs to get more challenging over time. Now, often in the beginning, individuals will make great leaps, sometimes literally, but most often figuratively, in their physical performance. So it's not unheard of for someone to jump 5 or 10 pounds in a specific lift, like a squat or an overhead press, or be able to do more push-ups, something like that, within the first couple weeks or months of training. We sometimes refer to those in the field as beginner or newbie gains, because the most accumulation of strength and physical capability usually happens in the first couple months, or even the first year or two, sometimes 3 of training. However, that is not always the case for our autism and neurodivergent athletes, because many of them, both for physical and adaptive or behavioral reasons, are going to take a longer time to acclimate to the exercise environment, to the exercises themselves. So we may have a much longer timeline for the athlete to start making progress with reps, with resistance or weight, with form and technique, and total volume as well. So it's something that is important to consider from a general programming perspective, because we don't want to start progressing or making an exercise more challenging before the athlete has actually met standard. And I'll get into that in a little bit. But when we're looking at the principle and practice of progressive overload, it means that the exercise, in order to get a training effect, meaning that the body responds by getting stronger, developing more muscle, or both, developing more stability, better motor planning, greater power as well, there has to be an increasingly more challenging stimulus. However, this is very important to take into context with many of our neurodivergent athletes, who may in the beginning have a lot of difficulty performing the basic movement pattern for a squat or a push-up or an overhead press or a medicine ball push throw. So oftentimes with our athletes, we are starting from a skill set that requires a modified variation of that exercise. So how do we determine when an exercise requires a modification? Because we can't just give an athlete an exercise and expect them to be able to do it at that standard level, meaning they can do it independently with proper motor planning and good performance of the exercise and safe technique and all of these things. That is an assumption that is highly problematic. So when we are assessing an athlete performing that squat or performing that push throw or performing that lat or band pull down, we are determining at what level are they currently performing this exercise. That's going to be the athlete's baseline. Oftentimes, we need to provide a modified variation of that particular exercise, and this is an absolute must-know if you are implementing fitness, again, predominantly strength training programs for our autism and neurodivergent population. When we modify an exercise, it is a simplified variation of that same exercise. So same movement pattern, same muscles are involved. We are not deviating from it so much that it is no longer the same thing. So if we are modifying a push-up, we are still having the athlete do a push-up. It's just going to be a simpler variation or an easier variation of that push-up with the eventual goal of having that athlete reach standard performance. Again, I'll get to that. Of that push-up, of that exercise. So for many of our athletes, if we're talking about the push-up, they're going to start with their chest on a box, their hands on a box, their knees on the floor, and just push up their upper body. And then we can add knees to that. So now they're pushing up their upper body and their hips with their knees leaving the floor as well. This is a fantastic modification because the athlete is still deriving all of the benefits of this exercise without succumbing to some of the breakdown that we often see with the push-up. So we have to look for these cues because they're really important when we see the athlete going into some type of contraindicated position or what we call compensatory movement. So if we see compensatory movement, it means that we need to modify the exercise. Compensatory movement is a breakdown in the mechanics of that particular exercise. And the mechanical breakdowns of an exercise are specific to that particular exercise. So there are certain compensatory movements that we see in the squat. There are certain compensatory movements that we see in the push-up. There are certain compensatory movements that we see in the band row. Each fundamental exercise that we use in autism fitness programming is going to come along with its own rules around form and technique. And these are things that many of our athletes are going to need to develop over time. And it's up to us as coaches to program and coach effectively so the athletes are doing the exercise as best as they possibly can. When we come back to the modification, if we see, as a general rule, that athlete performing 2 or more compromised or less than effective repetitions in a row where it is clear that they simply do not have the strength and stability and motor planning to complete a technically sound and safe repetition of that push-up or of that squat or of that overhead press right now, then it's time to modify the exercise. When we introduce an exercise for the athlete, so we're following our label, demonstrate, do, and cue model that we use in autism fitness, and then we have the athlete perform the exercise, we are going to get a good sense almost immediately of how well this athlete can perform this particular exercise. So we may give them a few repetitions to feel comfortable with the exercise and to try it out. As soon as we're seeing, again, those 2 or 3 compensatory movements and the movement pattern is starting to break down, we're not going to have them do the exercise over and over and over, just expecting that they're going to do it better because they don't have that skill set yet. It's the same as though we have someone who is still learning a bodyweight squat, but we say, you know what? Let's see if we can put a 45-pound Olympic bar on their back. It's not time yet. So it's the same thing for our athletes. If they can't perform the exercise to standard just yet, then we use a modified variation, period, until they develop the strength and stability to progress a little bit more. So let's talk about standard a little bit. For the ease of use and for the sake of safety and performance, we use more or less the same numbers and the same volume for standard with every single one of our exercises. We use 3 sets of 10 repetitions. Easy to follow along. It follows the science as well with respect to being hypertrophic and strength developing in nature. So if someone's able to do 3 sets of 10 repetitions with a particular exercise with good form, with full range of motion, then we can say they have met standard. So for example, our standard with a push-up is 3 sets of 10 repetitions at a slight incline for the athlete, and then once that athlete, and only once that athlete hits that standard that standard metric, then we can talk about progressing, because otherwise it's just not time yet. There's no point in progressing an exercise before the athlete is ready for it. We're not going to bypass their being ready, both with their strength endurance and their motor planning, for them to seek out the challenge or be ready for the challenge of a progressed variation of that exercise. So we have to hone in on that baseline. What can the athlete do right now? Is there any compensatory movement? Do I need to modify this exercise for this athlete? So if they are not at that threshold of, or that bridge of 3 sets of 10 with good performance, independent of any additional cueing or modification, then you can progress. And you might be thinking right now, like, most of my athletes are not even at that standard level yet. That's totally fine. That's a lot of where our programming comes in, because we need to meet the athletes where they're at, which means that many of our exercises are going to be modified in the beginning. And rather than say, oh, we're going to stay with this modification for 3 or 6 or 8 or 12 weeks, we stay with it until the athlete is able to demonstrate that they have that physical capability, that they've developed that strength, that they've developed that stability, that they've developed that motor planning in order to be able to process with modification. This is really important, because if we're inviting physical compensation into the movement pattern, it is going to be far less effective, and we are also increasing the potential for injury, either in the short term or over time as well. This is something that we want to be cognizant of, and not just have the athlete do the exercise, but do it in the most fundamentally sound, safe and effective way as possible, and the modifications are there for just that. So looking at this 3 sets of 10 model for standard, that means that the athlete can perform the exercise with a full range of motion, with motor control. Though the resistance may vary a little bit, because some of our older athletes may be able to use more weight, some of our younger athletes not so much, or it could be the inverse too. I've seen 12 and 13-year-olds who are stronger than some 22 and 23-year-olds who have better motor planning, so it's not necessarily always age specific there. So what happens when that athlete reaches that goal of 3 sets of 10 with that particular exercise, whether it's modified or at standard? Well, then we can progress it. Now, if it's still at a modified variation, so the athlete is squatting to a box just above or just below parallel, great, we can lower the box a little bit more. In autism fitness training, we have a rule that we're not loading up the athlete with weight, like a sandbell or a dumbbell or a kettlebell, some type of goblet squat, until they're able to squat below parallel with motor control for that 3 sets of 10. Why? Because if they're still working on body weight through the full range of motion, adding weight to it is not going to provide any greater benefit. What's going to provide a greater benefit is them going below parallel with that full range of motion squat. If that athlete has already independently mastered that full range of motion squat for those 3 sets of 10, then yeah, absolutely start loading it up lightly at first. So the athlete can hold a 5-pound dumbbell, and maybe we're going to an 8-pound dumbbell, and then maybe a 10-pound dumbbell as well. There is so much room for growth there, and getting the most out of that particular exercise. And one of the, I don't know, fallacies or misconceptions, but something that comes up a lot is, do we need to switch the exercise around now? If your athlete is still at a modified variation of an exercise, we're talking about the fundamental movement patterns here, our squat, our pulls, our presses, our push-ups. If they are still at a modified variation of an exercise, there is zero reason to change it. And I have several videos talking about the variety trap, or why we don't want to use too much variety in our programming. But if the athlete is still at a modified version of that squat or that overhead press, there's no reason to transition it to a completely different exercise. They still haven't squeezed all of the juice out of that squat or out of that overhead press. So there is plenty of room to go. Now, what happens oftentimes, and I think this is where the misconception arises, is many of our athletes are going to need a lot of time and a lot of practice and a lot of consistency with a particular strength exercise in order to in order to progress. So it could be weeks, it could be months, it could be years, and that athlete is still moving towards standard of that exercise, and a coach or a parent or someone else could say, hey, they've been doing this exercise for a really long time, should we do something else? No, because they still haven't derived all the benefit from that exercise. So even if they're still, if they are still climbing their way towards doing that exercise at standard, keep going with it. They are not getting any less benefit out of that exercise. Again, if you think about it, if our goal is to have an athlete squat with a bar on their back, or squat with a heavier dumbbell or a pair of dumbbells or a kettlebell, how far are we from there right now? And this is not to say, oh, our athletes are at such a modified level, how are we ever going to get them to perform a truly remarkable squat? We can get there with enough time and proper coaching and consistency. We can get there. But the key is to not lose sight of the goal in the process. The goal is not to get to standard performance of that squat or of that press or of that pull down and then just abandon it, because it still has so much benefit to give our athletes. So when we're thinking about progressing doesn't mean, oh, we're gonna move to a completely different exercise. It means keep going with those exercises, because those fundamental exercises, the push, the pull, the squat, the carries, the hinge, are almost always going to be the cornerstone of good training throughout someone's life. They're going to need these movement patterns, and that's why we continue to develop them. So the goal is not to get to standard and then abandon it. The goal is to get to standard and then continue to progress it. And that's going to take time for a lot of our athletes. So that's something that we have to take into consideration when we are programming, when we are prioritizing certain exercises, when we are deciding how much time each week do we want to devote to fitness training. All right? These are all important factors. So our standard, 3 sets, 10 repetitions, independent performance, full range of motion, motor control. If we're not seeing that just yet, and it's fine, there's no reason to panic, but it is reason to program. We go with a modified variation of that exercise. There are different modifications for each exercise. So for example, with that squat, we use a box. Sometimes we use a band for trunk support. With a push-up, we can use a box or a bench and have the athlete just push their upper body and trunk up to begin with, and eventually we get that 3 sets of 10. Okay, now we're picking up knees as well. With the overhead press, we may start with a guided elbow prompt and then eventually fade that back. There are different ways to modify each one of these exercises. That, of course, is what you get in the Autism Fitness Certification as well. And this is what our coaches utilize in order to have our athletes gain independence with each one of these exercises, because it's not going to happen automatically. Once they meet standard with a particular exercise, then we can start advancing it. We can start progressing, usually by adding repetitions or adding more sets or adding more weight or resistance. These are very, very easy things to do. The key is understanding when and where to do them for a particular athlete. So I hope this has been helpful for you. We have our standard. If we are on the left side of standard, then we need to modify that exercise for that athlete and understand how to modify it so the athlete is no longer engaging in that compensatory movement. If we're on the right side of meeting standard, then we are progressing. The athlete has met standard, we are progressing now with resistance or repetitions or sets or 2 out of 3 or all 3 also. And keeping in mind that every once in a while, our athlete might have an off day, so we might have to cue more, we have to coach more, we have to modify the exercise a little bit, even though we haven't had to in a while, and stay consistent. So this is not about a certain amount of time elapsing and then saying, okay, well, it's time for a progression or it's time for an entirely new exercise. Stay consistent and good things will happen. I hope that this has been practical for you and helpful. I'd love to know what you think. Leave your questions or leave how this might be beneficial for you. If it's got you thinking about your programming, in the comments below. As always, it helps the algorithm here. And if you're interested and ready to become an Autism Fitness Certified Pro, go to autismfitness.com. You can download the Pro Course syllabus and learn all about the things that you are going to get both with your online course and your full day in-person or virtual practical with myself or one of our other master pros. I am Autism Fitness founder Eric Chessen, leading the movement for movement, and thank you very much for watching and supporting your autism and neurodivergent life skill athlete.